After losing his senatorial midterm and swearing up and down that he was never going to run for the presidency, Robert Francis O'Rourke, or Beto as he's known throughout the majority of the country, has announced that he is going to be seeking the presidency of the United States. Now, a lot of people say this is surprising, but it really wasn't surprising. In fact, we all saw it coming. There were a lot of people out there who swore up and down that this senatorial campaign that he had no chance of winning at all was really just a cover for him to get publicity across the country and make sure that the DNC could get him publicity across the country in order for him to run for the presidency. Now, even before he announced his run, many of the pundits on the right had already written Beto O'Rourke off, and there were a couple of reasons for that. I mean, a lot of people did assume that he was going to run, so O'Rourke was already in the polls, and he was polling very low. He's polling as a second-tier candidate, and that hasn't changed ever since he announced that he was going to run. He's gone up slightly, but he is still considered to be a second-tier candidate. And of course, a lot of people out there just kept saying that he wasn't going to run. And the rumor mill always showed that he was going to run, but O'Rourke himself came out and kept saying that he needed to focus on his family, he needed to take time off, and in all honesty, he doesn't really need the money from the presidency. He could live comfortably just off of what he has from his family for the rest of his life. And of course, the biggest thing that everybody cited when they said that O'Rourke was not going to run was his losing campaign against Ted Cruz. Now, even among his base, Ted is starting to move into the camp of being unfavorable. I like Ted Cruz, but he's got a base that he needs to maintain, and he's taking on some issues that he shouldn't, and he's ignoring some other issues that he should be taking on. And with that in mind, this was actually a tighter race than a lot of people thought it ever should be down in Texas. And I think that does start to fuel some of Beto's momentum. I think that's a part of the reason that he has made it as far as he has, and he's decided that he's going to run for president. But we can't sit back and imagine the fact that this wasn't manufactured by the DNC, or at least somebody over on their side, because this is a race that got a lot more national attention than anybody really thought that it should have. In addition, immediately after he announced that he was going to run, Beto set a campaign record, and in the first 24 hours, he raised $6.1 million. Now, this beat out Bernie's record-setting campaign for the first 24 hours because he was only at 5.9. But mysteriously, the story was completely buried by the Christchurch shooting and the fact that O'Rourke did not come out initially and reveal all of his sources and his campaign log. Now, these two things both definitely work in O'Rourke's favor, but in all honesty, they are not the most favorable things to him. If you look on social media, you are starting to see the fact that there's a lot of opposition that is mounting against Robert Francis O'Rourke, and it seems to be perpetuated and spread around by mostly right-wing Twitter accounts and right-wing Instagram accounts, but I don't necessarily believe that all of this specifically came from the right wing. As usual, we are starting to see things that have come from O'Rourke's far past. First, we look at his upbringing, we look at the fact that he was in a punk band, we look at the fact that his father was a judge, and there are some charges out there against him. Some of this we already knew, and some of this we didn't already know. The thing with the DUI, we already knew that. When he got so drunk, he crossed the center line and he killed a person. That was something that came out pretty readily in the Cruz and O'Rourke race, and that I can understand why that came out at the time, because that is actually a Texas Central issue. That's not necessarily a national issue. It is something that we should know, but again, it's something from the far past, and that seems to be the thing that most everybody is weaponizing at this point. Beto O'Rourke has some bad ideas, and we can obviously pick apart his bad ideas right in front. We don't necessarily need to go fishing so far back in order to ensure that he can't hold a public office, and yet people continue to do so. And that is shown in the other major opposition that's come up from him that's being spread around social media, and that's the fact that he was in a hacker group when he was younger. Now, I've heard the pundits already talk about this, and most of them have berated the people that have brought this out, assuming, of course, that it was people on the right that have brought it out against O'Rourke, saying that this actually makes him look cool, saying that this is a point in his favor, saying that it's something that makes it show that he knows more about today's society, today's computers, and he could actually opine on things like the tech giants, and I think that's complete bullshit. I don't think that that qualifies him for anything. What I do see, though, is that there was a journal out there that already had this story. He'd already dug this up on O'Rourke, and he's just releasing it now, even though this was known well before the race was over down in Texas. And that, I think, is a little bit telling as to what the source of this was and what this was actually intended to do. O'Rourke is definitely a different candidate. He's not something that I would ever have expected to gain any sort of traction in the Democrat Party. He seems to have settled comfortably into a very progressive agenda, but sometimes his agenda also seems to change depending on the audience that he keeps. And in all honesty, I've coined a term, I don't know if it's ever going to catch traction or not, but Beto O'Rourke seems to be running Hillary Clinton style, or just Clinton style as well. Except for the fact that he said it out loud and he exposed the machine a little bit for what it was. What I mean by Clinton style is the fact that he has come out in front of an audience already and urged them to shape his campaign to be what it is that they want him to be. And he says campaign, and in all honesty, it's going to be campaign. I mean, it's not like there's going to be a lot of communication from the people in the White House for him to change his policy and his platform to what it is. So what we get out of this is going to be a vapid and empty campaign full of empty promises that there's no real way that anybody can keep, and a candidate who would enter the White House with an agenda in mind that is clear and concise, but nobody in his electorate knows anything about. And I think that's honestly a big part of the reason that he's getting so much opposition right now. On Twitter just this morning, I saw Charlie Kirk put out and perpetuate the story of the DUI and the hacker group, and I think Charlie Kirk might be a Democrat plant at this point, but he's not the only one. I see a lot of the MAGA faithful, a lot of whom I follow and a lot of whom follow me, are perpetuating these same stories, but I can't really see any clear-cut direction as to where they got it. And in all honesty, in a situation like this, with a candidate who has said the bad thing out loud, and a candidate who might pull out ahead of somebody who the DNC has already coronated at this point, some of this sourcing could be coming right from the Democrat Party. I mean, look at the Northam thing for a second. After Northam took a very extreme stance on abortion that's even more extreme than most people in the country are comfortable with, suddenly his yearbook showed up, and there were people already out there saying that that was a Democrat plant at the time, that the Democrats actually put that out there and tried to point it to being the Republicans trying to make outrage in the Democrat Party. But in Northam's case, it's only suspected. Look back at the birtherism thing for a second. That was something that was highly perpetuated by Donald Trump and a lot of people on social media, in regular media, and in everyday life over on the right. But let's never forget about where the birtherism argument came from. That was a Hillary Clinton thing. Hillary Clinton put the birtherism thing up for people to discuss, and of course it got picked up by people on the right, but that was sourced by the Clinton Foundation. When the whole Beto thing first started out, before he announced and while people were still talking about him getting in the race, especially during the Senate campaign, there was a lot of talk about the fact that Beto was running for vice president only. Wyatt and I talked about that over on my podcast a few weeks ago when we were still talking about Biden and Beto both getting in. And I would have completely believed that as well before this whole thing where he raised $6.1 million in the first 24 hours of his campaign. And I do believe that that may be a threat to some people over on the DNC. I talked about the fact that the Christchurch shooting was a cover-up for the fact that Nancy Pelosi didn't want to pursue impeachment, but that Christchurch shooting happened so conveniently at the same time that a underdog candidate raised $6.1 million in 24 hours, and the DNC may very possibly already have somebody coronated. As far as O'Rourke himself goes, I don't think he's got the political jobs to stand up with the massive amount of money that's sitting behind him. I would love to see where all of that money came from, and I am going to be researching this as the 2020 election cycle goes through. But I don't have to go back and find Beto O'Rourke's past in order to debate against his ideas. His ideas are generic, they're not going to work, and they're not economically feasible. And as he said to the crowd in front of them, he doesn't even know what his agenda is going to be. Or he does know what his agenda is going to be in office, and he just wants to campaign on the empty promises. And that's something we need to keep in mind as this 2020 cycle goes forward. What do you think about O'Rourke's chances at the presidency? Do you think he has what it takes? Do you think he's going to make it to the end? I always welcome a thoughtful and positive discussion in the comment section below, and especially over on Twitter. That is at Ed's blog Twitter with a 1 in place of the I. Thanks as always for listening to this show and supporting this channel. And remember, never take the words of bloggers, podcasters, or journalists as gospel. Find all the facts and draw your own conclusions. Take care. You're